Hello, welcome to the Daley Ranch house. My name is Rick Mercurio, and I'm a volunteer with an organization called the Friends of Daley Ranch because we love this place. And I think after learning a little bit more about it, you're going to love it too. I'm dressed up like this because I want to give you a feel for the history of when it really was a ranch. There's a lot to learn about the Daley family, and that's what we're going to be talking about, and this amazing ranch house that we're in right now. So it's called Daley Ranch because of a man named Robert Daley. Robert Daley was born in another country. He was born in London, England, back in 1844. And when Robert was just a little boy of 4 years old, something happened in a far-off place, far off from England, that is, in California. Something was discovered in 1848, and I bet you remember from your fourth grade history what that was. Gold. The gold rush started in California, and people from all over caught what they called the gold fever, because you just sort of go crazy when you hear the word gold. And so people started flocking to California, not only from the eastern part of the United States, but from around the world. And two of the people that caught the gold fever happened to be Robert Daley's sister, who was older than he was, and his uncle. And they sailed all the way to San Francisco, California. And they began working up in San Francisco, not in the gold fields. A lot of people that went to the gold rush made more money on the people who were going to the gold fields by doing services. And they began working with horses. Horses was a smart business to get into back in the 1800s because everybody needed horses for pulling people, for pulling plows, for hauling things. So the Daleys, this is his sister now and his uncle up in San Francisco, started their delivery service, or they called it livery. And Robert Daley got letters from his sister about how exciting it was to be in this far-off place called California. And when he got to be in his teens, Robert Daley wanted to join his family in San Francisco. And somehow his parents gave him permission as a teenage boy to get on a sailing ship and travel thousands and thousands of miles. That sailing ship had to first cross the Atlantic Ocean and then go all the way down the Atlantic coast to the tip of South America, Cape Horn, and all the way back up the Pacific side, past South America, Central America, Mexico, all the way to San Francisco, California, the Golden Gate. And there Robert Daley joined his family business, again, which was all about horses. And as time went on, Robert Daley had a dream. He wanted his own horse ranch. He wanted land. Now we're in the 1860s. The gold rush has been going on for about 10 years. And Robert Daley wants this land. But up in Northern California, back then, there were lots more people than Southern California. If you wanted land, there was lots of empty land in the southern part of the state. So in 1867, Robert Daley took a sailing ship from San Francisco to San Diego, and he had a family friend connection. And they went out over the next several months looking for this dream of Robert Daley's, land. And one day, Robert Daley and his friend on horseback came upon this very little valley right here. And it was a beautiful day. Robert Daley looked at his friend, he looked at the land, and he said, "I don't need to go one step further. I found exactly what I was looking for. I'm going to make my home here." And he did. So when Robert Daley found this amazing place that he decided to make his home, he couldn't buy the land because it hadn't been surveyed. It wasn't for sale. Nobody lived here. And so he just built a little log cabin and claimed it for himself. Now, later on, he would obtain legal title to the land through a very interesting process called homesteading. The federal government of the United States wanted people like Robert Daley to do just what he did, to find some empty land and to settle it and to make it productive with a ranch. So they had a deal where if you did that and you built at least a structure to live in, they would give you 160 acres for free. And that's how Robert Daley got his first 160 legally of land. But then he did something really clever. That log cabin, which wasn't a very substantial building, he put it like on a sled and got his big strong horses, and he pulled that log cabin to another chunk of land, not far from here. And then he told the government, well, now I'm homesteading this piece of land. I've got a structure on it, and he got the next 160 acres. And through clever things like that, he obtained a lot of the land that is now Daley Ranch. Now, of course, horses was the thing he knew best. So what Robert Daley did is he had a little log cabin, he built some corrals and some barns, and he got some big horses, draft horses, the kind that pull, that have great muscles, that are larger than the normal horses. And he started a livery service here in San Diego County. That is, he would hire himself out with his wagon and his horse to go to people's farms and dairies and haul their goods to market. And he would get a fee for that. And he liked that, he enjoyed that. But it was sort of lonely living up here by himself in the 1860s and 1870s. Escondido hadn't even started as a city. And this valley, this Daley Ranch, was far from any civilization. So one of the dairies that Robert Daley did service to was out in Valley Center. And a young girl caught his eye, the daughter of the dairyman, whose name was Rebecca. And before you know it, they fell in love, and Robert Daley married Rebecca Breedlove. The thing is, he was 37, she was 17. Yeah, there was a 20-age gap. But I tell you what, he chose well. Rebecca turned out to be a sturdy woman, and she moved up here with Robert, and they built a nicer home than the log cabin, and they made a home for themselves. And before long, they began having children. And the very firstborn was a girl, but she died young. Back in those days, it was a tragedy, and yet it was not that uncommon for the first or any child to not survive infancy. They didn't have the vaccines and the doctors that we have today, so they lost their firstborn. But the next three survived. The next one was Mary Ann Daley, George Daley, and Howard Daley. And that little family lived up here in this little valley, and they were self-sufficient. They grew their own vegetables, they planted fruit trees, they had chickens, they probably had some pigs. Of course, they had the horses. And Robert Daley continued to make money by delivering things and people around San Diego County. And at one point, the family started a dairy up here. They called it the Fern Valley Dairy. And imagine all the chores that the kids, the Daley kids, had to do on that farm. Imagine how lonely it must have been and the hard work they had to do to milk the cows, to get the cream from the milk, and to churn the cream into butter, and pick up probably all the manure from all the animals, and to pick the fruits, and to clean house. And there wasn't much to do that you and I today would think of that you do as a kid, because there was no internet or TV or radio or anything like that. But they managed to have a good, solid upbringing in this little place called Daley Ranch. Now think about the impact on the land from a ranch being in a spot that used to just be inhabited by the wild animals and plants and Native Americans that didn't have much of an impact on the land. A white man's ranch brought cattle, brought horses. Imagine the hooves of those animals trotting across the land and disrupting the vegetation. He would build roads, not thinking too much about erosion or where the roads would be sustainable over long periods of time, and now those roads are being eroded. Imagine all the native plants that were disrupted by not only the animals, but us planting crops and fields. Robert Daley also needed water to irrigate his crops so he could feed his animals. So he dammed up the creeks and created ponds where there were none before. That changed the whole ecology of the land by having cattle roaming around what had been unspoiled natural habitat. So there's many consequences of people on the land, including the buildings that he built here and the roads that he built. As time went on and the boys and the girl grew up, the middle child, the older boy, George Daley, began to dream a little bit bigger things than just living his whole life on this little isolated ranch outside of the new town of Escondido. He wanted to build things, and he had a good, sharp mind. And a little bit past the turn of the century, in about 1905 or so, when George Daley was a young man in his early 20s, about the same age his dad was when he set out for new adventures. George Daley left Daley Ranch with the blessing of his parents and a team of horses and some wagons, and he went down to San Diego and he started a road building company. And this was a good time to start a road building company in San Diego because San Diego was booming and roads needed to be built. And it was also a good time because this was when horses were beginning to be replaced with machines in the internal combustion engine. And this Daley road building company used some of the earliest bulldozers and other land moving equipment in the county, and they did very well for themselves. Now, a few more years go by, and it's 1916. Robert Daley finally passes away. It was a sad day for the Daleys. He had come over as a young boy, as an immigrant from another country. He had a dream. He worked really hard. He found a great woman to marry and raised a family. He achieved his dream, so he probably died a happy man. And he's buried in Oak Hill Cemetery in Escondido. But in that same year then, 1916, the daughter, Mary Ann Daley, had already gotten married and moved away. George Daley, I told you a few years earlier, had moved to San Diego to build roads. That left Rebecca and the youngest boy, Howard Daley, who was already in his 20s by then too. So they made a decision. Howard Daley decided to join his brother in the road building business, and he left Daley Ranch. Well, Rebecca wasn't going to live up here by herself, so she moved off the ranch. But they did a smart thing. They didn't sell the land. They kept Daley Ranch, and they kept it as a ranch. They hired other people to look after it. And so Daley Ranch continued to be a ranch, but they weren't living here. That leads us to a very interesting thing. This amazing room that we're in, the great room of what we call the ranch house, this place wasn't built until 1925, several years after everybody had moved off. So you might wonder, well, why did they build this? And I can tell you one reason they did not build it. They didn't build it to live in it. They didn't build it as their new house to live in. They were living in other places. In fact, they had other ranches in San Diego County, in the East County. They built this place as a vacation house, as a retreat for the family and friends to use for fun. It was a party house, essentially. And by this time, the family road building business had enough money to do a great job. So I'm going to be asking you to feast your eyes on some of the features of this ranch house on the inside that are still original after 95 years and still beautiful. The walls and the ceiling and the beams, beautiful. This is all a special kind of wood, redwood from Northern California. And it's not just any redwood, it's clear redwood. It means it has no knots. And it's tongue and groove, which means one piece fits into the other and you can't see the nails or the screws that holds it in place. Redwood was a smart choice, not only because it looks good, but because it's resistant to rot and termites, so it lasts. So all of this beautiful interior is redwood. The floors are original as well. They're oak, hardwood, and these things can last a long time because they're thick, so you can sand them down and keep them in good shape. The windows are also 95 years old, original, and there are so many windows. This place was meant for big parties and gatherings, so they have lots of light, and almost all of the windows double as doors, so you can open them up for the fresh air as well as the light. And the 4 dormers up above add even more light. Speaking of light, these fixtures that are above us are the original light fixtures that were blacksmithed in the Bandy Blacksmith Shop. And the other metalwork was done in the Bandy Blacksmith Shop too.
All right, my name is Philip Ewing. I've operated the Bandy's Blacksmith Shop over on Calamia Street. Went there in 1964 and they shut the shop down. The city shut the shop down in 1991. We moved over here to the museum area and have been running a school over here. We have the blacksmith shop and we have the wheelwright shop here. Now most of the work we do in here is just basic blacksmithing, and it covers a variety of different types of tools. Most blacksmiths, that's the basis of industry, most blacksmiths are tool makers. They make tools for pretty near every job that they encounter. Today I'm going to make a few scrolls, which is ornamental ironwork, which is kind of the fun work and when you get into blacksmithing. So I'm just going to get started on this. My favorite thing is the ornamental ironwork. when you get through with something that that you have built. Oh, Mr. Bendy says, you know what? You build a piece of ironwork, you want it to be able to be the piece that lasts forever. This basically is the starting of just a regular scroll with a plain end. There's all different types of ends that you can put on the end of scrolls. So that's another type of scroll right there. It's called a snub, where you actually thin it down right here and then upset it so you get a knot on the end of it. That makes when you have a railing like I did up at the Melrose Ranch, I had about 200 of those I made.
One of the more interesting features in this great room is this balcony here. And you usually think of a balcony as being on the outside of the house. But this is looking to the inside of the house. Why would they have a balcony inside, you might ask? Well, the Daleys liked their music. So when they would have a party here, they would bring up maybe a banjo player, a fiddle player, maybe a guitar player, and the musicians would be up on the balcony and the party would be below. One of the more interesting features of this room is this magnificent fireplace behind me. These stones, if they could talk, would tell a story of their 3 lives. These stones began in the eastern part of the United States, in New England. They're granite, and the sailing ships back in those days needed weight in the bottom called ballast, B-A-L-L-A-S-T, so that when the ship was in a storm, there would be stability on the bottom, weight in the bottom of the ship. So these stones started out in the 1800s as ballast in a ship. And that ship, just like Robert Daley, went all the way around the Horn and ended up in San Diego Bay in Point Loma. And that's where they were going to replace the ballast with cargo. So they had to take out the ballast and they just left it on the beach at Point Loma, San Diego. And then someone came along and said, well, boy, these would make a good road. So their second life was a road not too far from Point Loma in San Diego. Imagine the wheels of carts and cars going over these very stones. And then, when the Daley Road Building Company, called the Daley Corporation, was given a contract to pave that same road with asphalt, they had to dig these stones up from the road. And that was right when they were building this place up in Escondido, and they brought the stones up and made this amazing fireplace. The house itself is 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. 2 bedrooms are upstairs, 1 bedroom is downstairs, and then the kitchen. And the Daley family would come up here and spend a few days at a time, maybe invite friends. They still own the ranch, so imagine they have this 3,000-acre fun zone. They could ride horses, they could hunt, they could hike, they could ride their motorcycles, which apparently some of the Daley men did. And they would just come back here in the evening and have a big fire, play cards, bake some things out in the old oven that you'll see outside, and just relax and enjoy. One other thing, there used to be a pool on hot Escondido summer days. Wouldn't it be nice? Right behind the building on this side was a pool. They filled it in later. So this was a place for the Daleys to come and relax. And then they would go home and it would stay empty. Now, when the city bought Daley Ranch in 1996, this ranch house was still here and it was not being used. And there were some things about the outside that weren't in good shape. The inside, as you can see, is in original good shape. But the porch was falling apart. The roof was a fire trap because it was made out of wooden shingles. The outside was wooden. And the city knew they needed to spend some money if they were going to keep this building viable. So the city of Escondido spent $1 million about 15 years ago to put in new plumbing, new electricity, air conditioning, fire alarms, fire sprinklers. They rebuilt the entire front porch. It looks exactly like the original. They shored up the foundation. So they made it safe and they made it more modern in some respects, but they didn't have to do hardly anything in here. It's all original. And so now it can be used for different kinds of events and so forth. You're lucky that you get to see the inside of this house because it's not open to the public. When you come hiking at Daley Ranch, the door is locked. So thanks to our video crew, you're going to be able to see the inside of this ranch house. I hope you learned a little bit about why it's called Daley Ranch and how you can enjoy it today. Thank you.